The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Are you ready for some football? Yeah, we've had a lot of college football and some exhibition football in the NFL, but the real football starts on Thursday night when the Ravens go to Kansas City in a rematch of the AFC title game, and the Washington Commanders start the Jayden Daniels era, 4:30 on Sunday afternoon when they play at Tampa. They've been installed as 3.5-point underdogs. The Ravens are 3-point underdogs, and we're off and rolling. Got to be honest, I don't play fantasy football. Got a lot of friends who play fantasy football. I don't get wrapped up in it, but that's all you're hearing now. Oh, I had my draft last night. I got a draft for another league in 2 nights. Oh, my God, I got so many leagues. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your fantasy team. And certainly on Mondays, nobody wants to hear how bad your fantasy team did the day before and how you need to catch up on Monday night. Stop. Just stop with that. But enjoy football, because this is a wonderful time of the year. And really, the way the sports calendar works, it's pretty much what we do here. You know, we get baseball mixes in a little bit, and it was great when the Nats won the World Series 5 years ago. When Alex Ovechkin eventually passes Wayne Gretzky, that's going to be a huge deal. Could happen this season. But football dominates. It just does. And we're now going into a stretch where we will have football every single weekend right through February, 15th, 16th, whatever it is this year. And that, I guess, would include the Pro Bowl stuff that we would have in between the championship games and the Super Bowl. That's, you know, it's not football, but it's at least NFL guys doing something football related. So it's very, very fun. Let's put it that way. This is what a lot of us live for, the football season. And as we had, temperatures in the low 50s early this morning, maybe mid 50s, you can start to feel the vibe of football season. Pretty soon the leaves will start to change, and we'll all be feeling really good. So what do we make of what happened to Florida State? Florida State, as you remember last year, finished the regular season undefeated, and they unfortunately along the way lost their star quarterback. So when it came time to pick the 4 teams for the playoff, they were left out. Even though Alabama had a loss, they made it in, and Florida State with an undefeated record was left out. And there was a lot of arguing back and forth, and Kirk Herbstreit, who probably watches more college football than anybody, basically told everybody to shut up because they weren't that good, and without their quarterback, they were going to be cannon fodder. They were not going to be competitive in the playoff. And I personally would like to see Alabama, which managed to take the defending or the champs, the team that won the championship, to overtime, and they lost to Michigan. I would have rather seen that than have Florida State lose by 4 touchdowns, which is what they probably would have done against Michigan. So I didn't really have a problem with it. But okay, we come back for the 2024 season. This is a chance for Florida State to vindicate itself, and they have played 2 league opponents that aren't supposed to be that great, and they've lost to both of them, losing at home last night. First, they schlep all the way over to Dublin, only to lose to Georgia Tech on a last-second field goal. And then last night, playing at home in Tallahassee, their home stadium, they got the climate the way they like it. It's 90 degrees. You got Boston College in, not that BC players can't handle the heat, but, they play in a part of the country that, at least once we get into the fall, it gets pretty cool. And they go down to Florida State last night, and they win handily, 28-13, and realize that Boston College was a 16.5-point underdog in this game. 16.5. And they were house, Florida State was. And it was absolutely stunning. They were, even with the loss in the opening weekend, they were still ranked number 10 in the country. And the way the playoff works now with 12 teams, you're seeing stories like, Florida State still has a path at 0-2. They don't look very good. They're not that good. Trayshawn Ward had 138 offensive yards, including a 13-yard touchdown reception. This is against the school that said, we don't want you anymore. He played from Florida State from 2019 to 2022. Then he goes up to BC with Bill O'Brien, and they pull off this enormous win. And so after the game, O'Brien chatting it up with Scott Van Pelt on SVP and the show that he does at midnight, talking about how his team was able to pull this off.
These kids, since the day we walked in here, which was 7 months ago, they've given us everything that they've had. They're tough guys. We talked about, winning it up front. BC, the tradition of offensive lines, defensive lines. We won the game up front. We established a line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, and I thought these guys did a great job. And I'm so proud of these guys, Scott. It's only one win.
Sure.
But to come down here and with all the work they put in, really proud of them.
In camp, Bill, you might have an idea about guys. You might think you know, but until you really are out there and you put 60 minutes on the clock with somebody else, right, another team, you don't know for sure. So what was validated tonight that you believed might be true about your guys, and now you know it is?
Yeah, it's a great point. When you come into these first games, it's not like the NFL where you have some preseason games and you can kind of figure some things out. In college football, this is it. You open up at Florida State, and there were some unknowns, but I knew this was a tough team, Scott. I really did. I knew that these kids had, poured everything into being mentally and physically, tougher than they were 7 months ago. And I'm like I said, I'm proud of that. Again, one win. We got to turn the page really quick because we play on Saturday, but very satisfying to come down here and get a win.
We showed a brief bit of the highlight. It's so hard not to think Kyler Murray when I see Castellanos run around, because he's not the biggest guy, but he's incredibly dynamic with his feet and with his arm. And we're showing some of these plays here. He's a tough dude, too. How do you describe, Bill, what he gives behind that offensive line that clearly did its work tonight?
Yeah, you got to give Tommy a lot of credit. Tommy has he's worked very, very hard to get to this point. Obviously needs to continue that work ethic throughout the season, but he's an electric player. He's a guy that wants the ball. He's a winner. He's been a winner at every level, and we're really excited and glad that he's on our team, that's for sure.
All right, I'm going to close with this because, as I said, you've coached at this level. You've coached grown men and pros in the NFL. How do you balance, Bill, the knowledge that these are young men that need some guidance, they can't go crazy, with at the same time wanting to let them really enjoy what it is they just did?
24-hour rule, right, Scott? 24-hour rule. We'll let them celebrate a little bit. We don't get back till 4:30 in the morning. We got to turn around, and they'll have tomorrow off. It's a mandatory day off, and then we'll be back ready to go on Wednesday. But they got 24 hours, and they'll celebrate. And then I think it's a pretty business-like team. We'll find out, though, right? We'll find out. We've got to be that way, but we're looking forward to it.
That's Bill O'Brien, new coach at Boston College. What a great way to kick off his tenure, going down to number 10 Florida State and pulling off a convincing upset last night, 28-13, when they were 16.5-point underdogs. Interesting the way that O'Brien has bounced back and forth between college and the pros over the last 20 years. He was on the Bill Belichick staff with a young Tom Brady in New England. Then he got his opportunity to be a head coach off the Sandusky tragedy at Penn State, and he did a hell of a job there, taking over a program that a lot of people thought would just completely crater, that they would go through like 2 and 3 win seasons. He kept them competitive. That earned him the job with the Houston Texans. He did a decent job there. Then he bounces back to the New England Patriots as the offensive coordinator, and now he's in his first year as head coach at Boston College. And what a great way to start that off. So that was last night. College football from the weekend, as we've had the wrap-up last night with the upset pulled off by Boston College at Florida State, included some real stories there. And one of them was what happened with LSU, as for the third straight year under Brian Kelly, they lost the opening game. Last 2 years had been to Florida State, and then they go down to USC with the lead. They gave up a touchdown in the final minute of the game, and Brian Kelly, who got a lot of hype going from Notre Dame to LSU, got the $100 million contract, adopted this phony baloney Southern accent for a while. Well, what's he done there? He had the Heisman Trophy winner last year. They weren't in the conversation for the playoff at the end of the year. And now he starts off 0-1 with a team that couldn't hold a lead. And, you're the face of the program. You're supposed to keep a stiff upper lip, keep everybody calm. No. He lost his cool on Sunday night after he lost.
Coach, is it disappointing when you have, Savion Jones kind of really rose up, Aaron Anderson, John Emery, they kind of put you in position? Is it disappointing when those guys perform and you don't get a victory?
Hell yes. I mean, and that's what I said to the team. I said, we had some guys played their butts off tonight, and we're sitting here again. We're sitting here again talking about the same things. About not finishing when you have an opponent in a position to put them away. But what we're doing on the sideline is feeling like the game's over. And I'm so angry about it that I got to do something about it. I'm not doing a good enough job as a coach. And I got to coach him better because it's unacceptable for us not to have found a way to win this football game. It's ridiculous. And it's crazy.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's easy to say those things when you have like $80 million left on your contract. Now, they did buy out Jimbo Fisher last year at Texas A&M for $76 million. Maybe he's bucking for that. But this is like what John Thompson used to say, the great John Thompson, the former Georgetown coach. He said, you tell people you're doing a lousy job, sooner or later they're going to start to believe it. And yeah, it's inexcusable. You got to have your team ready to play, A, and B, ready to close. And you can't do it. And so you're pounding your fist on the table like a frustrated little boy. Well, Brian Kelly, how about winning some games? How about winning some big games? How about knocking off a USC team that had a terrible defense last year? I think they gave up an average of 34 points a game, and you scored only 20 points on them. How about you, Brian Kelly? Yes, you are sort of taking the blame there, but you're taking it with quite a bit of cushioning there. And then you have what's going on at Clemson, a team that was in the national championship discussion for years, and they were non-competitive in their opening game against Georgia. They lost 34-3, and Dabo Swinney has eschewed the transfer portal. He said, no, I looked at our roster and I looked at what we got. I didn't think we could replace anybody with better players. So, no, we're not doing that. And, yeah, they're using some NIL money, but they're not going all out on that. Well, it ain't working. They've lost 10 games over the last few years. They're good. They're just not great. And they had established a program that was elite under Dabo Swinney. Not the case anymore. This was Paul Feinbaum on Sunday morning after the Saturday loss.
It's as much about how well Kirby Smart has control of that program as it is as to say that Dabo Swinney's time as an elite coach is over. Clemson is a good program. They'll compete in the ACC. But their days as a program that matters, their days as a program that is spoken with reverence are gone. Everyone knows what they've done, but they're not doing it this year, and I don't see them ever doing it again as long as Dabo Swinney is there. And I don't mean that the program isn't capable, but his approach to college football doesn't work any longer. And he's been slow to move for everything. He now has that reputation as grumpy Dabo. And I frankly think Dabo Swinney would be smart to start planning an exit strategy. I'm not saying they're getting rid of him. They're not. They're stuck with him. He's part of who they are. But he would be better to look elsewhere, to find another way to do it, because it's simply not going to matter. He may find ways into the playoff in the future, but he's not going to find a way to hold up the trophy any longer. Not the way he's running that program.
So with that as a backdrop, the fist-pounding Kelly and the grumpy Dabo, we get reaction to that with the coach who's been there, done that. Dan Mullen did a good job at Florida, lost his job despite winning 10 games, 3 straight years, now working as an analyst with ESPN. First, his reaction to what Kelly said and did, and also to what the Clemson situation is, as he talked yesterday on Unsportsmanlike with the two hosts, Courtney Cronin and Keith Erzy.
Yeah, there were a couple of mistakes that they made, but he had to be happy with some of the performance. They came out, with Garrett Nesmeyer, the new quarterback, even though he has some experience. I thought they moved the ball up and down the field pretty well. They had a lot of yards. They just didn't finish off drives. They made some mistakes. I thought, that first drive of the game was a big one. They drove the length of the field, got all the way down there, and for some reason, coaches today don't like points. Just take points, create momentum for your team. And this is the third year in a row they've lost a close game in the first week of the season, and now they have to come battle back. But, that some of the little mistakes they made, but I thought they still had great opportunities to win the game. And I was probably more impressed with USC than unimpressed with LSU.
Coach, let's go further with that, actually, because it's easy to overreact after a week 1 win or a loss. So let's just react. USC, your takeaway on them, how good are they?
What I was really impressed with was their defensive performance. And, we knew when you watch a Lincoln Riley team, they're going to score points. Offensively, that they'll put up some numbers. But LSU came into the game with a veteran offensive line, some talented running backs, and the way that USC, especially in the first half, was able to stop the run was really impressive. And the physicality they played with, that's something that's been lacking the last couple of years.
Dan Mullen, ESPN college football analyst, joining us here on Unsportsmanlike. We've been talking about Dabo Swinney's comments, effectively pointed at the transfer portal and his lack of involvement there and frankly not wanting to get involved and hasn't been for quite some time. When you see the margin of defeat that they suffered at the hand of the best team in college football, but also how they've remained stagnant in their approach to how they're going to handle the transfer portal, how hot would you say Dabo Swinney's seat is at this moment? I know we're at the start of a new season, but how much longer can he continue to buff the notion that he doesn't have to play ball when everybody else is going that route in college football?
Well, it is interesting because you look and we know Clemson is a team always there to be able to compete for national titles. And you saw the separation, and the separation to me was within the skill position. They played pretty good defense. It was a tight game in the first half. Georgia's style, which is we're going to be a defensive team and wear you down over 4 quarters and pull away late. But one of the recipes to beat Georgia is because of the physicality of their defense. You have to win one on the outside. You have to have some perimeter players that you can beat them one-on-one, create some explosive plays down the field. And you saw in that game, and we've seen now really over the last couple of years, the lack of explosive talent that Clemson has on the outside. And, when you look at a lot of people in the transfer portal, there's a lot of great skill players and perimeter players in the portal that make impact at different schools around the country. And the fact that Clemson won't go there, I think you see it, their inability to have guys that can score, because they've recruited players, but they have players leaving. And when you have players leaving and no one coming in, when it's kind of a one-way street, you have talent leaving, you don't have talent coming in the transfer portal. I think they're really falling behind in college football.
Coach, how about we go to some of the positives? Week 1, we saw some blowout wins. We saw some close wins. Who were some of the teams that really impressed you?
Well, I think you have to start with Miami. And, we've been looking at them and with Mario Cristobal and saying, hey, how, they're a team that usually kind of has a lot of talent, but they make mistakes and find a way to lose some games. With Cam Ward coming in, you're talking they went in a rivalry game week 1, which you don't always see huge rivalry games like that week 1, in a very hostile road environment, and they were clicking on all cylinders. And Cam Ward could be the guy. He has enough kind of swagger to him that could lead Miami back to the top, because they certainly have talent all over the field, and now they have a quarterback that kind of has the swagger to put all that together and lead them to the top. I thought they were extremely impressive. The other team to me was Penn State, in another similar environment, went into a hostile environment in somewhat a rivalry game. I think obviously the rain and the rain delay at halftime kind of diminished that environment. But Drew Allard, the one thing, we know Penn State over the last couple of years, but they have some great running backs. They run the ball. They have not pushed the ball vertically down the field very well, and I thought they were able to do that and push the ball vertically down the field. And if they can do that, they're going to have an opportunity, to compete for a playoff spot in the Big Ten.
ESPN college football analyst Dan Mullen joining Courtney Cronin and Keith Irizarry here on Unsportsmanlike. Notre Dame and the path that they have to the college football playoff. I know it's week 1 and we're putting a bow on it here, but it feels like there's 2 teams you can already pencil in to the 12-team college football playoff. Georgia and Notre Dame, based on what they got out of the way down in Texas, down at College Station, the win over Texas A&M, and then what the rest of their schedule slates to be this year and the strength of that schedule. What impressed you the most about the way that Marcus Freeman's team handled the environment, the game, everything that was thrown at them against Texas A&M? And do you also see their path being as easy as most project to get into that 12-team playoff?
You really do. I think Notre Dame, you would pencil in ahead of Georgia at this point. Looking at Georgia still has a very tough schedule ahead of them, and having to maneuver through the SEC. But when you look at Notre Dame and the rest of this schedule, because especially with the 12-team playoff right now, you're looking at Notre Dame at 11-1. They're going to be in at 10-2. Maybe there'll be some question marks. I think the arguments could come if there's a bunch of teams that have a great year, that there's 10-2 teams out there arguing for that final playoff spot. But you don't see many losses left or on Notre Dame's schedule. I think that win and that ability to go in and win at Texas A&M, I was really impressed with their defense. And it's almost a question of whether you're more impressed with Notre Dame's defense or disappointed in Texas A&M's offense. They did not look good offensively at all. But as you said, Notre Dame only has 2 true road games the rest of the season. They have 3 of their road games are neutral site games. Now they do have a tough trip to USC to finish off the season, which looked tougher than after watching last night's game against LSU than maybe you projected early on in the year. But when you look at that, there's not many road bumps in the schedule, and if there's not many road bumps in the schedule, even with the college kids, if they have a bad day and they lose one, they're still going to be a playoff team. So I think they have possibly one of the easiest paths to the college football playoff as any team in the country.
And it does not appear that they are missing Brian Kelly very much, does it? That was Dan Mullen yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike here on ESPN 630 with a wrap-up of the college football weekend as we roll into week 2, which I guess starts Thursday. Do they start? Yeah, they got games all the time. Even though the NFL is getting started with Baltimore, Kansas City, they will cram in a bunch of college games as well. It's are we reaching the saturation point? No, not really, because the television ratings are through the roof. Will it go the way of boxing because of overexposure? No, I don't think so. I think we're just in love with the game of football. And, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the big screen TVs. It's unbelievable to watch a football game in 65 inches of HD when you think of 30 years ago, maybe less, maybe even 20 years ago, when they started to have flat screen TVs in like the early part of this century. But once the HD kicked in about 2006, 2007, man, it's a whole new world, and we just can't get enough of football watching, and they just have to find more and more opportunities to put on more and more games because people cannot get enough of football, both college and the NFL. I used to think that college at one point was sort of regional, having lived in Texas, People were crazed about college football. Didn't really get that sense growing up here in the Northeast, but that's changing. And the ratings that you get in Washington and New York and Boston and places like that are pro towns, they're still good. And the more they are at this level, the more television exposure college football gets, the more money the players make, the coaches, everybody is happy. Coming up, did Todd Bowles slip, or did he meant to use the R word in describing the team that the Buccaneers will face on Sunday? We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. Sports and politics. They haven't always been strange bedfellows, but there are some strange things happening regarding the election and a couple of teams that we will get to. Joe Theismann had an extended conversation with our morning show yesterday on Sportsmanlike. We'll play some of that later this hour. And it was 30 years ago today that a Steve Spurrier quarterback threw 7 touchdown passes in one half for Florida, and at the end of the season found himself buried on the bench. Yep. Those were the days of the old ball coach before he came here in 2002. We'll get to that and a whole lot more. Bram Weinstein now at 11 o'clock every day here on ESPN 630. And the Tony Kornheiser Show, in case you don't know, has moved now to 2 o'clock as we are rolling into football season, the most wonderful time of the year, especially for our business. We will have plenty to talk about between now and the Super Bowl in mid-February. I want to get to what Todd Bowles said yesterday in his news conference as they get ready to play the Commanders on Sunday. It's a 4:25 game. I guess the schedule was adjusted so much for the Commanders with Dan Quinn that they were also off yesterday. It was my impression when he sent them off for a long weekend on Thursday that they'd be back yesterday and we'd hear from Quinn. Did not. Today is the usual day off, Tuesday, so I don't think they'll have the players there. I guess they get everything rolling on Wednesday, so he gave them really a nice break. That's like, almost 5 days, given that they split around noon on Thursday. So they should be well rested as they hit the field. They are 3.5-point underdogs for that game. Before we get to the Todd Bowles stuff, you may have heard about this story. In Philadelphia, there are some advertisements that are plastered around the city, little posters that they put up on, telephone poles and things like that. And it shows Kamala Harris wearing an Eagles uniform. And the ad says that Harris is the official candidate of the Philadelphia Eagles. And it included a link to a website, philadelphiaeagles.com/vote. Well, if you click on it, it takes you to the Eagles website, and it doesn't list Harris as the official candidate anywhere. It just lists the important dates regarding voter registration and in-person voting. I don't think it's illegal for a football team to endorse a candidate, though in Pennsylvania it's very, very close race between Trump and Harris, and it would seem that if you're the Eagles, you don't want to alienate half your fan base who may be Trump supporters, so you wouldn't do that. And in fact, the Eagles put out a statement: "We are aware counterfeit political ads are being circulated and are working with our advertising partner to have them removed." We don't really know who created the advertisements. They look fairly official, but I don't think that the Eagles did this. I believe them when they say that these were counterfeit posters, but I don't think that there's anything to stop a football team from endorsing a candidate. Now, athletes used to be more vocal about this, and we saw during the Trump administration that there were teams that would refuse to go to the White House because of their stance, and Golden State won some championships. They wouldn't go. Steve Kerr, a very outspoken critic of Trump, they didn't go. The Nationals went in 2019 after they won the World Series, and a couple of them, like Kurt Suzuki, spoke out very much in support. I think he even wore a MAGA hat, if I'm not mistaken. Ryan Zimmerman also spoke in support of Trump at the time. This was pre-insurrection, of course, pre-pandemic. So that that may have been a factor in all that. But whatever. But there's nothing I don't think there's anything that would stop a team from doing this. And there was a time in this town where the Redskins, a number of them were not only Democratic, but they were big supporters of the Kennedys. I'm talking about Sam Huff, who I believe ran for Congress in West Virginia as a Democrat at one time. It's probably after his playing career was over. Brig Owens was a supporter. Ray Schonke was a big Kennedy supporter, very close to the family. And Bobby Mitchell, a great man who I got to know a little bit, was also very much a Kennedy supporter. You don't see that anymore. And some of this goes back to Michael Jordan and, the Republicans wear shoes too thing comment that he made. And, things have started to change too. And we saw that during the Black Lives Matter movement and people like LeBron and the march that was led here in D.C. by Bradley Beal. That was a significant moment. But this thing that's going on with the Eagles, I do believe them that it was counterfeit posters and so forth. But I don't think that there would be anything to stop them if they wanted to do that. And then there's this. This comes from Montana. Student athletes in Montana are being offered thousands of dollars to endorse Senator Jon Tester's reelection bid in a race that could determine control of the Senate. Montana Together, and I'll get to them in a moment, this is the organization, Montana Together contacted the athletes at the University of Montana with offers of $400 to $2,400 to back Mr. Tester as part of a name, image, and likeness deal, according to reports. So this would be a new twist on the NIL, that there is an organization which, I'm not sure about exactly, but if this is true, an organization has approached athletes at the school, said, we will pay you money if you endorse Jon Tester in his reelection bid. There's a woman named Lily Meskers, who's a University of Montana track and field athlete, says she and others were offered money to support the three-term incumbent. But among the stances that he took, he voted against the Protection of Women and Girls Sports Act, which would have prevented biological men from competing in women's sports. And so that would seem that would be something, they could, I guess it could go both ways. But she said, I think me and a lot of girls on the team honestly shared a really similar reaction to this. Why would we endorse something that fundamentally goes against us? As women athletes, we work really hard to get to a level we're at as Division I athletes and have to have biological men take these positions away from us. It's really frustrating. So I get that. But here's the thing about Montana Together. It says in the AP story here, Montana Together's origins are murky with little to no digital footprint of the organization. Indeed, it doesn't have any filings with the Federal Election Commission, and its Facebook page, which lists Montana Together as a political organization, hasn't been active since late February. So maybe it's just a bunch of bogus stuff, but I just threw it in there because we're now 2 months away from the election, and we've got these kind of things going on, and especially with the college situation where the athletes are allowed to be paid, what stops this from happening? What would stop if you had like a really, high profile player to be approached by like Quinn Ewers? I noticed he's doing a Dr. Pepper commercial, and he's the quarterback at Texas. So what would stop a campaign from approaching Quinn Ewers and say, hey, we'd like you to endorse Harris, or we'd like you to endorse Trump, and we're going to pay you money to do it, and we can do it. We're allowed to do that, and you're allowed to accept that money. Now, he might face backlash as he took the field. He might get more booing, if he throws a couple of interceptions. But again, I don't think that there's anything that's illegal about this. The people who are screaming election interference, no, I don't think that's the case at all. All right, to Todd Bowles. Now remember, Todd Bowles has history here in Washington. Not only was he an assistant coach at one time, but he played on the Doug Williams Super Bowl team. He was a safety here for a few years, had a decent NFL career, and has transitioned into coaching and has now been head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for, I think is this his third year? It's his second or third year. And he's getting ready for the opening game against Washington, and answering the usual questions that a coach answers going into a game week, including what about the support cast that Jayden Daniels will have.
I mean, they got a ton of them. They didn't play them all, but they got a ton of them. They got 2 running backs, obviously Eckler and Robinson. They got McLaurin, they got Brown, they got McCaffrey, they got Ertz at tight end. They drafted the kid from Kansas State, can play very well, and he's got a lot of options.
Okay, that's the usual yak that you have going into a game. Here's the one that's creating some attention, and we're still in that phase now about the name, and frankly, in the year plus that the Josh Harris group has owned the team, they haven't done anything really to tamp this down. It's, they could have come in here and they could have said, look, we saw what happened here with the name change. It was inevitable that Redskins was going to go away. The organization put a lot of effort into naming them the Commanders. What we have to do as the Commanders is win games, and people will become more and more used to the name. Didn't hear that. One of the first things that Josh Harris said when he was introduced and asked about the name, he said, the fan base will determine that. Well, the fan base has clearly said, Commanders, that stinks. And it's evidenced by the things that are said publicly and on social media, and also the fact that they really have not done well in selling merchandise. Like for years you heard, oh, yeah, Dan Snyder would make a killing if he changed the name Redskins because people would buy up all the stuff with the new name. Nope, that hasn't happened. Now, we had that transitionary name, Washington Football Team, which is what I think the name should be. But whenever you hear Josh Harris talk about the team, he'll either talk about, and I don't have a problem with this, and I don't think anybody should, when he's talking about when they were named the Redskins and what they did as the Redskins, he called them that. He will also say, when talking about the organization as a whole, he'll say Washington Football. He seems to go out of his way not to say Commanders. Todd Bowles, he's been around the league a long time. It's the last year that this organization used the name Redskins was 2019. It was 5 years ago. They've gone 2 years of Washington Football and now 2 years of Commanders. This was Bowles facing the rookie quarterback in Jayden Daniels, and listen to how he addresses the name of the team that they will be playing Sunday.
I think if you find yourself just facing the rookie quarterback, the other 10 guys going to kill you. So we're facing the Redskins. We're not facing Jayden Daniels. They got 10 other guys that we got to worry about as well. So we don't look at it as facing a rookie quarterback. We're trying to beat the Redskins.
It's trying to beat the Redskins. Now, maybe it's possible he has a stance on this, much like Mark Mosley. Mosley was very, very outspoken after they changed the name. He said, this never should have happened. And he was involved with Dan Snyder in trying to do a little public relations campaign that it was okay, and visiting the reservations and things like that. And he said, no, what I did as a Redskin, that should stand up. I'm insulted by this. John Riggins, and this is typical Riggo, when they changed the name, he says, I'm not going to have anything to do with the organization. I was a Redskin. I'm not a Commander. Well, and rightly so, the Josh Harris group with Mitch Rales and Mark Ein and others brought Riggins back into the fold. They have included him in activities. I don't know if they pay him. I assume they did, because I've known Riggins long enough to know that he won't do anything unless you pay him. But he's in supporting the organization. I've not heard him speak much on the name. I guess he is under the impression that, I'm assuming this, that there will at least be a detailed study and detailed work on changing the name, that it could go back to something else. It's not going back to the Redskins. The other interesting angle on this is that they are going to honor the man who designed the logo that they wore for so long on the side of their helmets starting in 1972. And if you've been following this, there's a senator from Montana who is saying, I won't support the RFK bill, which would turn the federal land, the land would stay in federal use, but they would redo the lease to allow for hotels and restaurants and commercial buildings, which is not allowed on the current lease, and they would extend it 99 years that would clear the way to build a stadium. And he's not going to vote in favor of this until they satisfy the history of the team. He does not want the team to be turned back over to Redskins. He doesn't want that. He understands that can't happen. But he also, would like to see William. I think it's his Blackfeet. I think is his name. Is the one that designed it. Wants to see him honored. Now, could they have a logo that does that? I don't know. I think that trial balloon that happened several months ago with Dan Quinn wearing an unofficial shirt which had a W and a feather hanging off of it. He talks a lot. He was very closed-mouthed about that. I just wonder if that was floated out there for the reaction that it would get, and it did get a lot of reaction. And he stopped wearing clothes like that. But when you hear a former player like Todd Bowles, who won a Super Bowl with this organization, has, I'm sure, a lot of pride, and how easily he says Redskins, seeing as a coach, as an assistant coach and a head coach over the last 4 years with names other than Redskins, how easily he says Redskins, is that an indication that he and others are maybe talking behind the scenes and saying how can we get back to that? Josh Harris says, and he said this a couple of weeks ago, he said the name is not going back to what it was for obvious reasons. Some have said, well, what are those reasons? Why couldn't you do that? Well, I think he didn't explain this, but the backlash would be enormous. And I think that with what they're trying to do and trying to separate themselves as much from the Snyder era, I mean, once they get rid of Jason Wright, whenever he leaves during the season or his contract ends at the end of the year and he goes, that starts to wipe the slate even cleaner than it is right now. But to hear Todd Bowles say those words as easily as he says them, let's play that again. This is again talking about Jayden Daniels, makes you wonder.
I think if you find yourself just facing the rookie quarterback, the other 10 guys going to kill you. So we're facing the Redskins. We're not facing Jayden Daniels. They got 10 other guys that we got to worry about as well. So we don't look at it as facing a rookie quarterback. We're trying to beat the Redskins.
Is there a groundswell? Are there former players calling up Dan Snyder? Shame on me. Are they calling up the Josh Harris group, either he or people in his organization, and saying, we have our feelings about this. We'd like them to be known. We didn't want to deal with Dan Snyder or his group at all, but you guys seem reasonable. Maybe we'd like to talk this out. It may be nothing, maybe much ado about nothing. Who knows? But that was interesting. Coming up, a quarterback who won as a Redskin, identified as a Redskin, marginal consideration for the Hall of Fame. Joe Theismann. Joe Theismann, a guest yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike. He'll give you his analysis of what he's seen from Jayden Daniels and plus what's going on with the Cowboys. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
It's a story about as old as the NFL. Player holds out of training camp, huffs and puffs, not coming in till he gets his deal done. And then we get to a few days before the game checks start, and suddenly the deal gets done. And that's the case with Trent Williams. He's on his way to the 49ers and will be practicing with them and could play on Monday night against the Jets. It's not a new contract. It's the contract he has, but it now has more guaranteed money in it. So he's happy. 49ers are happy, and that's a done deal. Hassan Reddick, the strangest one we've seen in a long time, traded from the Eagles to the Jets, expecting a long-term contract, hasn't gotten it, still holding out. Now, maybe that gets done today or maybe even tomorrow, and we could see him on the field as well on Monday night. But he's the only one that's a holdout. Jamar Chase is a hold-in still with the Bengals, but he's got 2 years left on his deal. So, that's about it. But this always happens. As soon as that's where these guys get paid. It's not a year-round salary. It's 17 game checks is what it is. And you start missing game checks, then it really starts to hurt you. The fines are one thing, and the fines can be excused. And whatever fines he's rung up, I bet that's part of the deal to get him into camp. I think that's probably been expunged. So Trent Williams is happy. The 49ers are happy. They're not happy about this, but thank God it turned out the way it did. Could have been so much worse. Ricky Pearsall, their rookie receiver, who was shot during an attempted robbery over the weekend, has been placed on the non-football injury list. This is very eerily similar to Brian Robinson, who was shot in an awful situation as well just before the start of the season 2 years ago, also placed on the non-football injury list, but had to miss the first 4 games. That'll be the case with Pearsall, who took a bullet in the chest, which exited out his back, but only spent 1 night in the hospital, which is remarkable to me. They're still sorting out the details of this, but the latest is he was walking alone carrying shopping bags to his car at 3:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, broad daylight, and a juvenile suspect, 17-year-old, attempted to rob him with a gun in the Union Square area. If you're from the West Coast, you may be familiar with that. And both Pearsall and the suspect were shot. The suspect is from 60 miles away, come a long way for there. And these players are identifiable. People know who they are, and they know they have money. I don't know what he was carrying. He was carrying some shopping bags. And this kid, 17 years old, tried to rob him. And fortunately, it turned out to be at least not life-threatening for Ricky Pearsall, but he's not going to play the first 4 weeks of the season. Joe Theismann making an appearance yesterday on our morning show on Sportsmanlike and talking about, of course, the Commanders and the Cowboys and other things as he talked to Courtney Cronin and Keith Azeri about the upcoming season and what he has noticed so far about Jayden Daniels.
I've spent some time with Jayden through the camps and stuff, and what's impressive is his desire to be able to understand and learn the game. He's not one of these guys that thinks he has the answers. He's constantly wanting to get better. He's constantly learning. And I think it reflected that in his composure when you watch him in the huddle, when you watch him communicate with his teammates. It's all the little things that people don't really get a chance to see that he does very well. And I'm excited for him. There was no doubt he was going to be the starting quarterback in Washington. I mean, they didn't take him number 2 to have him sit. Certain teams can do that because they have one that's really good. Like, for example, the Atlanta Falcons, what they did is a little, people say unusual, but you're looking at the future. He is the future in Washington, and I'm excited for him.
Joe, what do his teammates say about him, especially the wide receivers and running backs and offensive line?
I think they feel the same way. They feel like, you have to know the offense. You have to know what to do. You have to be able to learn how to talk to guys. Everybody has a different style. Some guys glare at a receiver if he drops the ball. Some guys don't say anything. Some guys even take it to a point where they get upset. Jayden just has a really nice demeanor. I mean, he really is. He's built to be a quarterback. He has this really, really nice sense of composure about him that he doesn't get real high, doesn't get real low. He plays the position with a lot of confidence, but yet not arrogance.
Joe Theismann joining us here on Unsportsmanlike. You bring up the intangible stuff that he has, that the Commanders knew throughout their research that they were going to get in trying to right the ship at the quarterback position. 11th different starter since 2019 from an X's and O's perspective, because I remember when Cliff Kingsbury was hired, there was this idea that maybe Washington would try to move up to go get Caleb Williams to pair him with his former offensive coordinator. But the X's and O's that Cliff Kingsbury can use now with Jayden Daniels, how does he open up his playbook, having somebody who, set records for rushing and throwing throughout his college career en route to a Heisman Trophy?
Well, I think if you look at Cliff's time in Arizona, he had Kyler Murray. So, of course, he basically has the blueprints for the mobile quarterback, for the quarterback that can handle things on the move, for somebody who can escape and get out of the pocket. He already has that. I don't think they had the running game in Arizona that we're going to have in Washington. Got some really, really good backs, Austin, obviously, and Brian. There's depth at the running back position. I think they'll want to be able to run the football to a degree where you can protect Jayden. Remember, both for Caleb and Jayden, the 1 and 2 picks, all we've seen is them have success in the preseason. We see them run around making plays. We see Jayden putting the ball down the field, perfect throws. They haven't handled and seen adversity yet.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what's going to happen when bad things start happening, and they will. It's just the nature of the business and the nature of the position. So, how are they going to handle those situations going forward? That's something I'm curious about, because I know how good they are from a talent standpoint. I know that they deserve to be where they are. I know that they earned the right to be starters. But now, what's the growth going to look like for both of them at that position? In Cliff's case, he has somebody that he's already sort of dealt with in Arizona because of Kyler's abilities to be able – first of all, Kyler throws the ball very well. I think his height does limit him from throwing certain routes because the people are a lot bigger in front of him. But then he moves around. But I think, they'll run the game a little – they'll use the running game a little bit more. And then as far as the passing game goes, I think the receivers that we have in Washington, I would match up with most anybody in the league. So he's got to be excited about that.
Joe, you talked about this run game. I want to go a little further on this one. So we know what Brian Robinson is. What do you think Austin Eckler's role is going to be in this offense?
I think, Brian, I guess you could almost call him the hammer. And Austin is the that Swiss Army knife that you can use in a lot of different situations. It reminds me to a degree when I had the fortunate opportunity to play with Joe Washington and John Riggins. Joe was our third down back. Joe was the guy we could get the ball to, and John was the horse. He would carry, he carried us. I think Brian can be that guy, that hammer, and Austin can be that guy that you can put in a lot of different situations and, leave him as a running back. Now, Joe Washington, he used to tell me, Joe, you think Joey, being a smaller guy, wanted to bounce it outside? No, he wanted to run inside the tackles all the time. He wanted to be an interior runner, and he was good at it. And I think we have a little bit of that kind of a combination in Washington at the running back position.
Joe Theismann, Super Bowl 17 champion, joining Courtney Cronin and Keith Irizarry here on Unsportsmanlike. We've been talking about the situation for another NFC East team that has a lot more uncertainty than Washington, and that's, of course, the Dallas Cowboys and what's at stake this season. And having heard from Jerry Jones and Dak Prescott within the last week, Dak saying he doesn't really listen to what his owner's saying in the media, his owner saying that it's not necessarily something Dak has or has not done, that it's their cap situation. I don't know. It's a war of words if you want to call it that. But how do you feel Jerry has handled these contract negotiations? And because it just feels like a deal is not getting done this week if Dak Prescott's people know anything about leverage.
It's confusing to Dak. It's confusing to us. Jerry will say something, and you try and understand the direction that he wants to go in. I wouldn't say the team. I would say he, because he is the decision maker for the Dallas Cowboys. At this stage, I think as the season starts, Dak's got to focus on one thing, and that's playing quarterback. CeeDee's under contract right now. We don't know what the Dallas Cowboys are going to look like. Over the last 3-4 years, we had an idea. Big offensive line, defense puts a lot of pressure places. Now you've had to change at the coordination positions. And so, what are they going to look like? How does this offense going to suit Dak's abilities? I think, to me, if I'm Dak, do what Joe Flacco did. Play it out. Play it out to the end. I mean, I realize Dak sort of has said he wants to set the bar, but that's not going to happen. First of all, I don't think Jerry can afford to do that, because you're looking at Micah Parsons probably, next year? He's going to have another big contract's going to have to come up. So how much money do you have allocated for those particular positions? I mean, you still have to fund the rest of your football team. I think at some point you just have to shut it down and say, okay, let's go play football. Dak has to say, okay, I'm going to let my people are going to handle this thing going forward. I'm going to focus on one thing, and that's trying to win football games.
Joey,
and, obviously some of the stuff that Jerry has said has been very confusing. Mm-hmm. When you listen to the press conference, and it's what's he really trying to say? And I don't, I couldn't figure it out. I don't know if you guys could.
Joe, would it be difficult to play in that situation, though? I mean, you played quarterback in the NFL. Would it be difficult to be Dak Prescott in the spot?
I don't think so. I think in anything you're inspired. I think it's a great motivator to know that, you're going to be an unrestricted free agent next year. And you look around the National Football League, there's 31 other football teams. And believe me, there are not 31 other starting quarterbacks at the level that Dak can play at. So there's opportunities. But then he's not. Here's the thing. The other thing that I was sort of surprised a little bit that nobody talked about is, I think Dak's 31 years old, and so you're at a point where this contract to me has to be the big one. Mm-hmm. It has to be the money contract. If it goes 4 years, you're looking at 35 years old, 36 years old, and you're at a point where, who's going to pay you whatever the number is going to be at that point? Let's say in excess of $50 million. If the number was somewhere in the 50s, it would have been a deal I think he should have taken. If it's not, I don't know. I have no idea what the negotiations were. But don't try and be the top of the ladder. Hey, Tom Brady, for years, was like middle of the pack when it came to being paid. Unfortunately, we get focused on dollars because they're so big. I want to focus on major wins. You can win 12 ball games, which they have the last 3 years. But what do you do when you get to the money time, the real money time? What happens when you get to the opportunity to be a champion? To me, that's what I think. That's what everybody's looking at with Dak is, well, you haven't been able to quite get there. And so this, to me, I think is a great motivating year for him. I think all he can do is focus on leading his football team. And it's hard to compartmentalize, but put this behind you. If they decide to sit down and he's off to a heck of a start and they come to the table and say, okay, we want to talk, you listen. But you cannot have your attention divided and think that you can play at the level that you need to play as a professional quarterback.
That's Joe Theismann yesterday on Sportsmanlike here on ESPN 630. He's still Joey Sunshine saying that the Washington receiving core is as good as any team in the league. No, it's not. They got Terry McLaurin, and they got a lot of question marks, and they didn't go all out to get Brandon Ayuk, get that alpha guy. It's good. It's not great. So there's that. Also, when you're talking about what Dak Prescott is doing, it worked out pretty well, especially on the field. The two that I can think of, it may have happened other times, but remember 1991, Mark Rippon went into that season. He was offered a contract extension, but it really wasn't much. He said, the hell with it. I'll play out the season and see where it goes. He winds up as a Super Bowl MVP. Still had to hold out in 1992, but eventually got the contract he wanted. He flirted, believe it or not, he flirted with Canada. Bruce McNall, who I think later went to jail, but had worked with like John Candy and Wayne Gretzky, and they bought the Montreal Alouettes. And he tried to get Mark Rippon to go there. I guess there was contractual stuff in the NFL or whatever it was, or they didn't offer enough money. He didn't go there. He wound up, re-signing here, and then, had a really steep decline in his career. So there's that. And then Joe Flacco in 2012, I believe it was the 2012 season, he did the same thing with the Ravens, but they had free agency, and he wound up with a $100 million deal the following year. Not all of it guaranteed, but he was able to cash in. It's a show-me situation, and he showed him. Both cases, these guys were Super Bowl MVPs. If that happens with Dak Prescott in the current environment, you can be sure he's going to get a contract that's going to top $60 million a year, maybe more, because as an unrestricted free agent, nobody's going to have to give up anything to get him. So I think it's a good situation for Dak Prescott, and I agree with Joe. I don't think it's anything to worry about. And I was thinking as Joe was talking too about opening day quarterbacks, as we now have Jayden Daniels, the 8th different starter over the last 8 years for the Commanders, and Theismann, who broke his leg in 1985, ending his career, had started 7 straight openers. He started every opener from 1979 through 1985. Since then, we've had Rippon start 4 of them, 1989 through 1992. So he started 4 straight openers. And Kirk Cousins starting 3 straight openers from 2015 through 2017. That's it. In those almost 40 years since Theismann's career came to an end, we have had just a revolving door of quarterbacks. And when you think about the Green Bay Packers, now Brett Favre didn't start the opener in 1992 for them. They had Don Majkowski, but it was either a game or 2 into the season that he came in and started for like 20 years, or 18 years, whatever it was. Aaron Rodgers takes over. He starts like 18 years, and then Jordan Love is now the quarterback, and he may have a run. And you just think about, what the Washington football franchise has been through with quarterbacks and the great stability that Theismann capped off, because Sonny Jurgensen started the opener in 1964, started at every opener through the 1970 season. Then Billy Kilmer, because Jurgie got hurt in 71, Kilmer started 71 and 72, 73 and 74, I believe. Then Jurgensen retired after 74, so then it was Kilmer from 75, I guess, or 70, whatever it was, right through 78, I believe, and that's when Theismann took over. But think about the quarterback stability that you had between 1964 and 1985, and now it's just one quarterback after another in that 39-year period. One guy starts 4 straight openers, one starts 3 straight, and other than that, it's just been whoever it is. So let's hope that this is the start of a very long run for Jayden Daniels, as we hoped it would be with Robert Griffin III. Unfortunately, he wound up with starting, I think, just 2 straight openers, right? 2012 and 2013. I guess 2014. So we did have 3 straight with RG3. So we had 3. So 2 quarterbacks have started 3 straight since the end of the Mark Rippon run. Anyway, that's a wrap for me. Bram is coming up next. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.